On behalf of Vivekananda Study Circle, I extend a warm welcome to the guest, Revered Swami Atmarupanandaji, professors, students, residents of the campus, Swamijis and the Brahmacharis of the Ramakrishna Math, to our special lecture, Why Search for Oneself. I request everyone to kindly silence their mobiles. Thank you. Now, I request our volunteers, Ajay, Sanjay, to start the program with an invocation. I request everyone to stand up for the invocation.
तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। असतो मा सद्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्योर्मा अमृतं गमय। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्ति।
I request the guest of the evening, Revered Swami Atmarupanandaji, the faculty advisor of VSC, Professor C. Balaji, and the spiritual mentor of VSC, Revered Swami Atmashraddhanandaji, to offer flowers to Swami Vivekananda. I request Revered Swami Atmarupanandaji to kindly grace the dais. I request our volunteer Akshay to present a fruit basket to Swami Atmarupanandaji. Swami Atmarupanandaji is a renowned monk and a scholar of Ramakrishna Math. He joined the monastic order in 1969 and has spent many years in India and later at Vedanta Society at Hollywood in USA, engaged in monastic, scholarly and spiritual training. He combines a contemplative and mystical approach with an extraordinary scholarly training with a good sense of humor that are helpful in explaining subtle concepts of Vedanta to the students. He has spoken at several national and international conferences and meetings on Vedanta in the light of teachings of Swami Vivekananda. He has written numerous thought-provoking articles on spirituality and self-development. Now, I would like to invite Swami Atmarupanandaji to address the session. The subject for the today is Why Search for Oneself.
Om Ardram Jwalati Jyotirahamaasmi Jyotir Jwalati Brahmahamasmi Yohamasmi Brahmahamasmi Ahamasmi Brahmahamasmi Ahamevaham mam juhomi swaha. Melting into the light, I am the light that shines. The light shines, the light which is Brahman. That which I am is nothing but Brahman. I exist and I exist as Brahman. I myself offer myself into the infinite light, which is myself. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. So friends, I'm very happy to be here again tonight. I saw some of you last night. I don't know how many of you were here last night, but some of you, I recognize a number of faces. So I'm very pleased to be back again tonight. As I said last night, let me say for those who were not here last night that it's a great honor to be invited to the IIT, a great institution, one of the premier institutions of India and of the world, a great institution with a wonderful history, wonderful tradition, though it's not an old institution as institutions go. It's a very great institution and one with a great beginning, a great history, and undoubtedly a great future. So it's a great honor, a great privilege to be here. And let me express my thanks to Swami Atmarupanandaji Maharaj, an old friend of mine, the editor of the Vedanta Kesari here in Chennai, the monthly journal, a very old journal of the order, one of the two English journals of the order, and the Swami who is the spiritual guide for the Vivekananda study circle. It was because of him that I have the privilege and the joy of being here with you and sharing some ideas. So last night I spoke about are Swami Vivekananda's ideas really universal? Tonight I'm going to speak on quite a different topic, though it will touch on some of the themes I spoke on last night. But I'll be approaching, the topic is quite different in nature, and so I'll be approaching things from a different angle. Tonight I want to speak on the topic, the search for the self. Why should we search for the self? What is the need for searching for the self? Who am I, and why should I care who I am? Why should I seek for self-knowledge? I chose the topic because it's a topic of universal interest, potentially universal interest, I should say, because most people think that they know who they are, so there's no need to ask, who am I? If you, except in India, you could ask 10,000 people in other countries who they are, and spontaneously they'll give an answer which is a very ordinary answer. Well, I'm Swami Atmarupananda, I was born in America, and so forth. Only here you would find one in, I don't know how many you would have to ask before they might think that, oh, you're asking in a spiritual sense. But once we understand why we should seek self-knowledge, then it's a question of universal significance. And that's what I want to demonstrate tonight. Some of the ideas will not be new to you, but hopefully I will add to the understanding that many of us have. So it's of universal interest because everyone needs to know who they are. Even if they think that they know, Vedanta says that you don't really know. If you really do know, then you're an illumined soul, and you wouldn't be sitting here listening to a lecture. So we can assume that you don't really know, but you may have some philosophical understanding. Many of you do have a deep philosophical understanding of who you are. But it's, again, a question of universal interest and a question of enduring interest. A question that has been asked for millennia, not for years, not for centuries, but for millennia. And one that will be asked as long as there are thinking men and women, as long as there are people who want to go below the surface of things. So the topic is one of extreme importance, and that I hope will become even more clear as I go. So let me speak a little bit about the history of the search for the self, and then I'll go to the search itself. But first, let me explain sort of the philosophical standpoint from which I often operate in talks like this, and that is to understand that there are four fields of knowledge. Any philosophy, to be a comprehensive philosophy, has to address four different fields of knowledge, or I should say fields of experience. We have four fields of experience. The most obvious field is this, the world, that which we see. A philosophy which doesn't explain this is not much of a philosophy. What else is it going to explain if it doesn't explain this? So one field of experience is the world around us, the world that we see, the world that we experience, at all levels of our experience, the world that we experience all about us. Science has taken that as its main search. What is the world? What is the nature of this? What is the nature of this that we see, hear, smell, touch, and taste? How can we analyze it and understand it? So philosophy also has to attempt to explain the world around us, what it is, why it is that we perceive it, how we perceive it. Again, a philosophy is not much of a philosophy which doesn't do that. Another field of experience is, who am I? I, the one who am seeing this world. I have the experience of the world around me, but I also have an experience of my internal world. I see you, you see me, but I don't see your thoughts and you don't see my thoughts. I have my internal private world, not private because like in the West where everyone wants to keep everything private behind closed doors and locked doors and everything. Not because we're trying to keep it private, but because it is private, because people don't have access to it. So I have my internal world, the world of my thoughts, the world of my emotions, the world of my values, the world of my reflections, the world of my memories. All of that is my internal world. So a philosophy which doesn't explain the internal is not much of a philosophy either. So a philosophy has to explain this. What is it? Why is it? What is its nature? What is this inside? Just as science has taken over from philosophy largely, at least in the West, and partly in India, but not fully in India. But in the West, philosophy really has been overtaken by science and the explanation of the outer world. And so in the internal world, philosophy has been overtaken somewhat in the modern world by psychology. As some of you know, psychology used to be a branch of philosophy. It was not a science. Psychology was not a science. It was a branch of philosophy. Trying to understand from a philosophical standpoint the nature of the mind, the nature of internal experience. But as science, modern science, gained ground in the 19th century especially, and into the 20th, then psychology moved from philosophy to science, especially in the 20th century. You find a philosopher like William James. He was also a psychologist, but he was a psychological philosopher. So he was at the time when psychology was beginning to shift into a scientific paradigm, but it was still philosophical even then at the end of the 19th century. So the outside world, the inside world. A third field of experience is what more is there? We've taken care of the outside, we've taken care of the inside, then what other field of experience can there be? There is a third field, and that is the field of value. We can use the word God for it, the field of God, where God, G-O-D, is a placeholder for what is real. Now, in religious systems, of course, they either say that God is real, or like Buddhism, they say that the state of nirvana is real, or the state of enlightenment is real. But in some way or another, they have an idea of a transcendent reality. But everybody has a sense of what is real. Everyone has a sense of what is real. That's why we say that someone who worships money, well, money is their God. Why is it their God? That's used not in a serious sense, but actually it should be taken seriously, because what you consider to be real, you consider to have value. What you consider to have value, that you consider to be real. reality and value are inextricably tied together. This thought, the idea that reality and value are tied together, wherever you have the sense of reality, you have the sense of value. Wherever you have the sense of value, you have the sense of reality. That's a philosophical thought. As I said, and this is a tangent, I'll come back to the main theme in a moment, but this is a tangent, that science has taken over the explanation of the outer world, especially in the West. And the science of psychology has taken over the explanation of the internal world. That's unfortunate. Not because science is bad, science is very good. And science has delivered so many things, and that's why science has overtaken philosophy. But there are areas that science can't touch, and those areas are best served by philosophy. But in the West especially, philosophy has been so damaged. People say in the West that, well, after 2,500 years of Western philosophical development, you still can't come to any conclusion. You still don't know anything. You're still asking the same questions and refuting each other's answers, whereas science says this is true, this we can experience. If you get a huge jumbo jet to fly in the air, you can't sit around and argue whether the principles of aerodynamics are true or false. You see the jumbo jet flying in the air. How did that huge piece of metal get up into the air? So it's experiential. So science deals with that which can be demonstrated. And philosophy, after 2,500 years, seems to still just be asking the first questions and never coming to any answers. But there are things that philosophy can decide, that philosophy can explain. And this is an example of one such. That it's a philosophical thought, not a scientific thought, neither for psychology nor physical science, that wherever you have the sense of reality, you have the sense of value. Wherever you have the sense of value, you have the sense of reality. If I worship money, if I'm a miser, I want money and I can't ever get enough, then there's no question that I think that money is real. Money is the most real thing to me. If I'm a hedonist and I just love sense enjoyment, I can't love and be passionate about sense enjoyment unless I think that sense enjoyment is real, that it's providing me a real value. So whatever, if I love science, I can't love science and think that it's all false. No, wherever I have the sense of value, that this is valuable to me, I have the sense of reality. That's important, and I'll explain later that that's important because much of spiritual life, no matter what religious persuasion you might be of, but much of religious life, spiritual life, is changing your sense of value. By changing your sense of value, you're changing your sense of reality. And so those two are connected. So, again, we have this one field of experience, the outer. I said I'd come back from the tangent, so now I just did. We have this field of experience, the outer world. We have this field of experience, our inner world of thoughts and imaginations and dreams and hopes and aspirations and all of that. We have the realm of value, that is the realm of reality. And again, I'll give a placeholder, God, for the sense of reality, in the sense that whatever we think is real, that becomes God to us. If we think matter is the only reality, then matter is our God, not in a theological sense, not in a religious sense, but in the sense that this is reality, this is value. So we have the realm, the field of experience of value. That's connected to our internal world and external world, but it's a different level of experience. And the fourth field of experience is the mind itself. I said one field of experience is our internal world, but that's the internal world of experience. But the mind is the instrument of experience. A philosophy which does not explain the external world, which does not explain the internal world, which does not explain the sense of reality and the sense of value, and which does not explain the mind, is not much of a philosophy. So again, about the mind. I've talked about the other three. Let me talk a moment about the mind, because this is sort of the basis of the talk. Once that's understood, other things are easier. The mind is what? The mind is the instrument of experience. I know happiness through the mind. I know sadness through the mind. I know knowledge through the mind. I know ignorance through the mind. I know clarity through the mind. I know confusion through the mind. I know delusion through the mind, and I know enlightened thoughts through the mind. So the mind is the instrument of experience, that through which I know the internal world, because again, I'm making a distinction. It's a philosophical distinction just for the sake of discussion, but a valuable distinction between the mind and the internal world of experience. It's through the mind that I experience the internal world. It's through the mind that I experience the external world. It's through the mind that I experience value. And so that's why the mind deserves its own field of experience. External world, internal world, value or reality, and mind. Those are the four fields of experience. Now, each philosophy tends to give prominence to one field or another. If you take materialism, it obviously gives an emphasis to external reality. It says that matter is the basis of everything. The mind itself is the a result of material combinations. When you get material combinations in a certain complexity, then consciousness is produced. But consciousness is the result of material operations. The idea of God comes by the operation of these material combinations. It's an illusion which comes by the operations of matter. And so the sense of an internal world, that comes because of the operations of matter. So that's a philosophy which gives primacy to the external world. Idealism, that which says that everything is mind. The mind is, everything is mental. I see you here. You are products of my own mind. You are products of my own perception. Idealism says. I'm not supporting that right now, but that's what idealism says. So that, of course, gives primacy to the internal world. It says that there is really no distinction between internal and external. Everything is internal. I see you actually inside my own mind. So different philosophies give different emphasis to different fields of experience. But each philosophy has to somehow explain all four, some by giving prominence to one or the other. Now, I said I would speak a little bit about the history. I'm not going to go into much of the history, but just mention it because it's valuable for giving context to the ideas that I want to discuss. You have, as Swami Vivekananda often pointed out, you have two great streams of philosophical thought. You have more than that, but the two great streams which are especially influential in the present world are the one stream that came out of ancient Greece, the philosophical stream which came out of ancient Greece, and then the stream which came out of India. Yes, you have Chinese philosophy also, and you have Middle Eastern philosophy, though Middle Eastern philosophy really came as a result of the inheritance of Greek philosophy, and then an acquaintance with Indian philosophy as well. But the two main operative philosophies in the modern world, or streams of philosophy, not philosophies, but streams of philosophy, with many philosophies in each stream, are the Greek and the Indian. So in Greek philosophy, you find that the main emphasis, not the exclusive emphasis, but the main emphasis was to understand what this is. There were idealist Greek philosophers like Plato, who wanted to understand what is the nature of form. But the emphasis was mainly on the external. How do we get the idea of chair? We get the idea of chair because there's a universal category of chair. And this is just a representation of that universal category. And so everything that we see, all forms that we see, are shadows of the real form, which is an ideal form. But again, the interest was in finding out what is behind all of this that we see. There were great mystical philosophers like Plotinus, who was in the tradition of Greek philosophy. He came after the time of Christ, but was not a Christian, though he had a great influence on Christianity, but he was in the stream of Greek philosophy. And he is very close to the Vedanta philosophy. You can find many parallels between Plotinus and Vedanta philosophy. But the mainstream of Greek philosophy, again, was on understanding what is matter, what is form, what is the nature of all of this. Whereas in Indian philosophy, you find that there were those who were interested in matter, there were those who were interested in form and so forth, but the emphasis in Indian philosophy, the main thrust in Indian philosophy at that in an early time, the Upanishads and soon after the Upanishads, was to understand consciousness. So on the one hand, you had the search for understanding form. And what is form? Form is the shape of matter. And so if you're seeking the nature of form, you're also in a sense seeking the nature of matter. So there's one stream that was seeking the nature of the external world, and the other which was seeking the nature of the internal world. In the early part of the Vedas, you find that they were seeking the nature of the external world as well. But by the time you come to the Upanishads, you find that search the main thrust of that search had been focused on the nature of the self. Who am I? What is consciousness? Why do I perceive this world? But seeking the answer within myself. So the Hindu search for consciousness. So why search for consciousness? Why search for the self? Why should I seek the self? Why were the Upanishadic sages largely interested in the search for the self? Because the first perception I have, the first thing that I perceive is what? Not my glasses. That's the first thing I see with my eyes. But long before I see my glasses with my eyes, I perceive the self. Behind every thought, behind every perception, there's the perception of the self, the sense that I am. Every thought that I have, every perception I have, takes place within the sense I am. I am. And so the sense of self is primary. It's that from which every other thought comes. So, and at a lower but still very important level, in fact extremely important level, the nature of my perception is conditioned by my self-sense. If I think myself to be a physical being, then I'm going to see physical reality as primary. If I begin to think of myself primarily as a mental being, if I become heavily engaged in intellectual interests and so forth, and my main interest becomes intellectual, and I begin to think of myself as primarily a mental being, then I begin to see the world as more mental than physical. And if I begin to think of myself in terms of consciousness, then I find that again the world has changed. The world has changed. I see a world which is supported and sustained and existing within consciousness. As I change the sense of who I am, my very perception of the outer world changes. And so it shows that, to use simple mathematical terminology, that my perception of the outer world is a function of my self-perception. My perception of the outer world is a function of how I see myself. And so, why should I seek self-knowledge? Why should I know who I am? Because if I don't know that, then what I'm seeing is connected to who I think I am. And if I don't know who I am, then how can I have a correct knowledge of the outer world? If I don't know who the perceiver is, how can I hope to have a clear idea of the perceived? If I'm the perceiver, how can I hope to understand the perceived if I don't know who I as the perceiver am? So the search for the self. Why the search for the self? The world is perceived as a function of self-perception. So the search for consciousness and the search for self came together at the time of the Upanishads. It's a very strange thing, and I'll come back to this, I think, at some point in the talk. But it's a very strange thing that in the West, after so many centuries of development, going back to the Greek thought, you can take 2,500 years of development of Western thought. That's not a short time. Not even by Indian terms, it's a short time. Indian thought goes back further. But still, that's a long time, 2,500 years of philosophical thought, and then 500 years or so of scientific thought from the early beginnings of modern science. And yet, in the West, there's still not a clear idea of consciousness. There's not a clear idea of consciousness in the West even now. I'll try to come back. Well, it'll be better in another part of the talk. Let me come back to that. Hopefully, if I remember the connection later in the talk, to illustrate how the idea of consciousness is so unclear in the West, even now, even among thinkers, important thinkers. So in India, the quest for the self became the quest for consciousness. What is consciousness? Because it was seen that when I look within myself and I try to see what's the essence of myself, who am I really? Who am I really? I'm taken back closer and closer to consciousness itself. So the search for the self and the search for consciousness came together. Now the Buddha famously started with his teaching. He started his teaching with a perception. Some religions begin with a theological statement. There is God, and God has this message for the world, and God sent this book for the world, and God sent this prophet or this avatara or this messenger to the world, and so forth. Those are matters of faith that one may accept or may not accept. But one of the interesting things about the Buddha is that he started with a perception that can't be denied. It's a perception that we try to deny, but when it's pointed out, we have to accept, yes, it's true. He started out by saying that all is dukkha. By dukkha, he didn't mean that we all go around weeping all of the time and everybody is always sad and everybody's always depressed. No, he didn't mean that. But he meant that even our good experiences, it doesn't deny that we have good and happy experiences, many of them. But even those are not satisfactory. Even with all of our good experiences, it's not enough. So dukkha means unsatisfactory, incomplete, unfulfilling. And so he started out with this teaching. His first teaching is sarvam dukkham dukkham. Everything is unfulfilling. Everything is unsatisfactory. So he started out with a perception, not with a theological statement. That there is God and God lives in such and such a loka and you should believe in him and he sent his messenger and I'm here to tell you about his messenger and so forth. No, not that. He started with a perception. The Upanishads also started with a perception. Quite different from Buddha, but a perception also. And the Upanishads start with the affirmation of the self, that I am. And that's the one thing that we can't deny, that I am. I should admit, and this would take me into a long tangent, and I find it hard to find my way back to the main topic, so I won't go off into it right now. But the Buddha denied the self. That was another thing that he did. He denied the self. But if you look at his teachings, what I find and what many find is that what he denied was the phenomenal self. He denied the phenomenal self, and he denied the idea of unity. But he didn't deny the state of enlightenment that one who thinks he's a phenomenal self attains to. So one of the philosophical problems in Buddhism is jumping from there is no self to if you know that there's no self, then you're enlightened. Well, who is enlightened if I don't exist? So that's one of the great problems in Buddhist philosophy. But there was a reason why Buddha said that there is no self, and that reason, if we understand it properly, Vedanta has no problem with it. But anyway, Vedanta, coming back to the main point, Vedanta starts also with a perception, that you have the perception that I am, you have the perception that I exist. So that is a very important thing. So I'll come back to that also in a few moments. But let me go a little bit forward with to conclude the history of the search. And again, just a very sketchy history. It's not a detailed history at all. No dates and nothing like that. But in the Upanishads, as I mentioned last night, one of the wonderful things in the Upanishads are the questions. In fact, one of the Upanishads itself is called the Prashna Upanishad, the Upanishad of questions. Wonderful questions. And then another Upanishad is the Kena Upanishad. Kena? Kena? Why is it Kena? Because Kena means why, or what, or by whom. In this case, it means by whom, or by what. So the Kena Upanishad begins, Kene shitam patati preshitam manaha, kena prana pratamah praiti yukta, Kene shitam vachamimam vadanti chakshushrotram devo yunakti. So it starts out by saying, by whom directed does this mind fall on its objects of thought? A wonderful idea connected to the theme of what is, who am I and why should I care? By whom is the mind directed? By whom is the mind directed? We have the idea that, well, the mind just is, and I am the mind. I'm the psychophysical complex. I'm part mind, part body. And so what do you mean, who directs the mind? The mind just operates. It's operating under its own laws. But the Upanishadic seers saw that no, the mind is an instrument. An instrument operates for a purpose, and that purpose is not the instrument itself. And so just as my eyes are instruments for seeing, my ears are instruments for hearing, etc., so the mind is an instrument, the main instrument of perceiving. That which takes sight, smell, touch, taste, hearing, puts it together and makes a comprehensible world for me. But for me, for what? For what is the mind operating? Why? For what are the vital forces, what are called the pranas? What are they operating? For what is this speech operating? For whom are the eyes and the ears operating? This was the first question in the Kena Upanishad. A profound question. I'll come back to that also. Now I've already said so many things I'm going to come back to that I don't know if I'll have time to come back to everything, but I think I will. Another question that I mentioned last night from the Mundaka Upanishad. Kasminnu bhagavo vijñāte sarvamidam vijñātam. What is that one thing by knowing which, O revered sir, everything here becomes known? What is that one thing by knowing which everything here becomes known? And so that was found in the Upanishads to be consciousness, and that was found to be the self, which is consciousness. So again, I'll develop that as we go forward, but these were the original questions of the Upanishads. And so one of the things I promised I'd get back to, the last thing that I promised, I'll get back to right now. And that is through the brief explanation of the 6 systems of philosophy. Don't worry, I'm not going to go into details of Nyaya and Vaisheshika and Sankhya and Yoga and Mimamsa and all of that. But just to mention that there were 6 traditional systems of Indian philosophy. There were other systems as well, Tantrika philosophy. To my way of thinking, Tantrika philosophy, including Kashmir Shaiva philosophy, can fit under the Vedanta. But however one divides the pie of Indian philosophy, there were 6 traditional systems. But the 6 systems were divided into 3 pairs. Nyaya Vaisheshika, Yoga Sankhya, or Sankhya Yoga usually it is, and Mimamsa Vedanta. Purva Mimamsa and Uttara Mimamsa, which is Vedanta. The first 2, Nyaya Vaisheshika. Nyaya is primarily concerned with logic, and Vaisheshika is primarily concerned with what is this, the nature of material reality. What is this world that we perceive? Analyzing it down into categories. Nyaya and Vaisheshika are related. Traditionally, they're recognized as related. Thank you. So, if we look at this logic and the operations of matter, that's what we find that modern science has done. Modern science is nothing but taking a logical approach to the analysis of matter, taking a logical approach to the analysis of the external world. That's what Nyaya Vaisheshika did, and that's what modern science does. That doesn't mean that modern science can be reduced to Nyaya Vaisheshika, but we're talking about the thrust behind each. The thrust behind each was the same. The intent behind each was the same. Then you come to Sankhya Yoga. Sankhya Yoga are the 2 psychological paths. Their main concern is with a psychological analysis, an analysis of the mind and mental experience. And the world itself is seen in terms of that. The causes of the world is seen in terms of that. So they're primarily the psychological philosophies. And then Purva Mimamsa and Uttara Mimamsa, Uttara Mimamsa meaning Vedanta, those were the philosophical or metaphysical philosophies, the metaphysical philosophies, those which ask the ultimate questions about the nature of reality. So again, if you look at Nyaya Vaisheshika, logic, the operation of logic on the nature of external reality, you find that's what science was doing, or that's what science is still doing, the physical sciences. But then you find that starting in the late 19th century and exploding in the 20th century. The first in the West, because that's where modern science was developing. In India, science was held back. Development here was held back for a long time. Because India, during the colonial period, science was not promoted that much. But starting in the West and now in India also, there was a flourishing interest in psychology. It began to grow. Why? Because once through modern science and technology, you have solved many of your physical problems, then you begin to focus on the mind and realize that, well, I'm not hungry anymore. I've got a house, I've got comforts enough, but I have a mind and the mind hurts. The mind is not right. There's something wrong with the mind. The mind is restless, the mind is unfulfilled, and so forth. A hungry person, a poor person, they have no time for the luxury of psychological problems because they're just trying to survive, trying to get something to eat. But once you've taken care of your physical needs, then you begin to realize that, okay, my physical needs are met, but my mind is not in a good shape. And so then the interest in psychology blossoms and it begins to flower as it has done in the West, and now it's beginning to do here in India as well. But after some time, when the mind itself has become more well-behaved, then the question comes, but who am I? Okay, there's the mind, the body, I've solved those problems, but then who am I? So then you jump to metaphysics. You go from physical concerns to psychological concerns to what's the meaning of all of this? What's the purpose of all of this? And so there you find that even in psychology, that some psychologists began to realize in the middle of the 20th century, and it began to grow with time among some, that you couldn't solve mental problems without solving problems of value, for solving problems of purpose. Why am I here? What am I to do? What's the meaning of all of this? And those become metaphysical problems. So going from Nyaya Vaisheshika to Sankhya Yoga to the Mimamsas, you go from physical science to mental science to metaphysical. It doesn't mean that when you get to the metaphysical, the scientific ends, or even when you get to the psychological, the scientific ends. But all of those become important. You go from one to the other, and all of them are important. All of them have their place. So the question that comes after the development of psychology is, who is it that has this mind? Who am I who have a mind? Who am I who have a mind? And what is the purpose of the mind? One of the weaknesses of modern psychology, of many schools, not all, but many schools of modern psychology in the West, is that they sought to make a well-adjusted human being. But a well-adjusted human being means what? If your idea of human life is to somehow have a good time, get through life without feeling too sorry for yourself, without feeling too miserable, just somehow to be reasonably happy and well-adjusted to society. You can go to work every day without too much problem. You can take care of your family without too much problem. Then for many, that was a well-adjusted life. That was as far as it went. But is that enough? No, that's not enough. You go to work every day, you come to school every day, you take care of your family every day. But sooner or later, if you are thoughtful, the question comes, but why? Why? Is this just an eternal thing that I go through and then I die and it's all over? So questions of higher purpose come into play. And so then again, the quest for the self. So now, another thing that I promised that I would get to, and that is that I will get to through the inquiry of René Descartes. All of you have heard of Descartes because you used Cartesian coordinates, x and y, and for three-dimensional z coordinates. You map things on coordinates in geometry and other mathematical and scientific areas. So René Descartes, he is, he started as he was a French mathematician, but then he took an interest in philosophy. He took an interest in philosophy, and he wanted to know why is it that mathematics is so precise. He was a geometrician, and among other things, but a geometrician. And so in geometry, you start by certain axioms, certain accepted axioms that these are known to be true. Just by the nature of things, these are known to be true. And then you come up with propositions that if these axioms are true, then this also seems to be true. And then you prove by using axioms to come to prove your propositions. And then those are built up, and so you build up a system which is based on what, at least in his time, was thought to be certain knowledge. By Einstein's time, they began to find that some of the axioms of geometry were not so certain as they thought. For instance, that through if there's a line and a point outside of the line, there's one and only one parallel line possible through that point. Einstein challenged that, and mathematicians had paved the way for him. But in Descartes' time, mathematics was a sure and certain field of knowledge, more sure and certain than the sciences. So he thought, why can't philosophy be done the same? Why can't we have certain knowledge in philosophy? So he began his search in a wonderful way, quite in tune with the Upanishadic search for the self. He began by thinking, well, now what am I sure of? What are the axioms of my experience, which I can make the basis for my philosophy? Axioms which can't be questioned. And so he thought, well, the external world, it seems to exist, I'm pretty sure of it, but can I really be sure of it? Is it an axiom that the external world exists as I see it? Well, no, the external world is dependent on my perception, my sense organs and so forth. If my sense organs are faulty, I'm going to see a world which is distorted. So I can't be sure of all of this. So that's out as an axiom. What about my mind? I said, well, one of the features of some forms of insanity is that the person is convinced that they're sane and that they're the only sane person. And so my conviction that I'm sane, that may be my form of insanity. So I can't be sure of my mental world either. And so then he thought, but what about me? That in all of my doubts, I can doubt everything. I can doubt the external world, I can doubt my mental world, but in everything I'm there as the doubter. I'm there as the doubter. I can't doubt that because I'm there as the doubter. When I doubt myself, I'm there in the middle of the doubt. And so how can I doubt it? It's impossible. So then he came up with this famous statement, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore I am. Because even in the midst of doubt, I'm there. Now that was an extraordinary statement. And he was on the verge of a Vedantic discovery. He was on the verge of being a modern Upanishadic sage, writing a modern Upanishad. But he had one problem, and that was that he came from a Western tradition of thought. And again, I'm not against everything Western. I myself am Western, so it's like doubting my own existence. I can't be against everything Western because I'm in the midst of the what I'm disparaging. But one of the weaknesses that he suffered from was the inheritance of Western thought, where there was nothing beyond thought. There was nothing beyond thought, except for God, and God was, in Western theology, Western theological thinking, God was disconnected from the universe. God was a creator, and everything here is creature. So there was a disconnect. So when he came to cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, he thought, I think, therefore I am, therefore my existence is proved by thought. That was a fatal mistake, a fatal mistake. If he had understood the simple idea, once you see it, it's a very simple idea. If he had understood the simple idea that I am, therefore I think. I can't doubt my own existence because even before I think, I am. I am, and then I think. But he had no way of thinking because he didn't have the categories of thought. It wasn't even a possibility that arose in his mind. He had because there was nothing in the Western tradition to give those categories. He had no way of thinking that I am and therefore I think, because thinking was equated with being. Thinking was equated with being. And so I think, therefore I am. But no, it should have been I am, therefore I think. I am, therefore I think. And so he was on the verge of a great discovery. So let's follow that a little further, because that's what the Upanishadic sages did. They were extraordinarily brave. They didn't stop at quick solutions. They also started out without having those categories of thought. But they didn't stop with the first conclusion they came to. So if I am, and therefore I think, if my existence is primary, what do I know about myself? One thing I know is that I am. I know that I am. But because I know that I know that I am as a knower. I am, and I know that I am. I am, and I know that I am. That knowing that I am means that I am conscious, that I am conscious, that I am conscious. If you pursue it far enough, you find that you are consciousness itself. But through that simple process of logic, we can come to understand that Sat and Chit are my very nature. Existence and consciousness are my very nature. That's my first, the one thing that I can be sure about myself. Everything else I can doubt, as Descartes doubted everything. Everything else is doubtful. But the fact that I am and that I know that I am, that I can't doubt. You may ask about, well, Satchidananda in Vedanta is described as reality. What about the Ananda part? Well, the Ananda part is a little harder to explain, though it's there also. But we find that I know I am and I know that I am, but I'm not always happy. So then where does the bliss come from? Well, one proof of the bliss part is an experiential proof. It's not a philosophical proof. If you ever find, and some of you might have, because it happens to people, not to lots of people, but it does happen to people. If you've ever found that you almost died, because of an illness, because of an accident, because of a near accident, if you found that you almost died, and you know that you almost died, when you come back and you see the world, everything looks dear. Everything looks dear. The person that you disliked before, you want to go up and embrace them. You want to hug them. Everything you want to sit and admire a mosquito. Everything looks dear. And so when you find that things are being taken from you, then suddenly you realize that no, everything is dear, everything is priya, and priya is a reflection of ananda. And so it's because of the present state of our mind and the disturbed state of the mind that we don't see that. So anyway, if we follow the Upanishadic seers, we find that I am and I know that I am. These are fundamental perceptions. Two other things that the Upanishadic seers did was that they examined the three states of consciousness, waking, dream, and deep sleep. That we all experience waking, dream, and deep sleep, deep dreamless sleep. Now in modern, there's a problem of terminology because in modern psychology, deep sleep is considered a sleep where there are REMs, rapid eye movements, and that's when you're in a deep state of dreaming. So that's not what is meant by deep sleep in Vedanta. Deep sleep in Vedanta means when you're in dreamless sleep, when the dreams also have disappeared. And when you wake up from a dream, you say, oh my God, I was so, in American English, we say in American slang that, oh, I was zonked out. Means that I was completely gone. I didn't know anything. I was sleeping so beautifully. I didn't know anything. I didn't know where I was. Completely. Vedanta says that that is a memory which is profoundly significant. It took me a long time to understand this. That it's a memory that's profoundly significant. The fact that I know when I wake up that I was completely zonked out, that I was completely unconscious. I didn't know anything. Vedanta says, how do you know that you didn't know anything? Because you were there in the midst of not knowing anything. You were there in the midst of not knowing anything. So even in deep sleep, you were there. And I had one help in understanding that from my childhood. When I was a boy in America, I loved American football, very different from real football. Real football, you actually play with the feet. American football, it hardly ever goes to the feet. American football is all about carrying the ball and throwing the ball and catching the ball with your arms. So it shouldn't be called football at all, but it is. And so I was very fond of American football. And one day I was playing with friends. I was 12 years old and playing out in a vacant lot where the ground was very hard. And someone threw a pass. There were only two of us on each side. You usually, for a full team, you have 11 on each side. But for kids playing, you take however many you've got, just like here with the kids playing football in the street. So two of us on each side. So I ran out, and the person that was on my team threw a pass to me, that is, threw the football to me, and I caught it, but to catch it, I had to jump, leap, and I grab it in the air, and I fell down and hit my head on the ground. And hitting my head on the ground, I went unconscious for a few seconds. It wasn't long, and I didn't have a serious concussion or anything, but I was knocked unconscious. And when I came to, I can still remember clearly. I remembered that, wow, I was unconscious, but I saw everything was black. There was nothing there, and I had no thoughts. But I had a clear memory of being present in the midst of unconsciousness. I had no body, I had no mind or no thoughts, nothing going on in the mind, and I didn't see anything. There was just the absence of everything, but I had a clear memory of the absence of everything. So then I realized that no, that's what happens in deep sleep. Normally, the mind is not sharp enough to remember that about deep sleep, but we do remember that, oh my God, I didn't know anything. I was so happy. Wonderful sleep, I didn't know anything. When we wake up from sleep that's disturbed by all sorts of disturbing dreams, and we wake up and said, well, I slept, but I didn't sleep well. It was such a restless night, so many terrible, disturbing dreams and everything. I'm still exhausted. But we have a dreamless sleep, and we feel such a satisfaction. So they say that it's said by the Vedantic seers that in dreamless sleep we experience the bliss of the self, the natural bliss of the self, and the self absent of all thoughts. But we're in a state of profound ignorance, primal ignorance at that time, and so we don't benefit from it. It's said that if you can enter into deep sleep consciously, then that's the same as entering into samadhi, into a state of enlightenment. But that's not easy to do. But the difference between deep sleep and samadhi is that samadhi is fully conscious. There's no darkness of ignorance. And in deep sleep, you experience that just you are, just I am, and the mind is silent, the body is gone, but I don't know anything. And so in samadhi, you have the same, except that you know the highest truth. So that was also a search of the Upanishads, a search for who am I in the midst of the three states of consciousness. If I'm in the waking state, I feel I'm the same person dreaming, and I'm the same person that went into the deep sleep state, then what is it that's constant in all of those? That which is constant is the sense of I am. They found eventually that there's something even deeper than the sense of I am, but the I am is the door into that which is silent. The I am is only there so long as we have a sense of being limited, because the I am is only felt as long as there's something which is the not I am. And so as it's said, when one goes beyond even the sense of I am, one becomes the silent self, that where even the I am is silenced, as Swami Vivekananda said in one of his beautiful poems in the hymn of Samadhi. So the three states of consciousness. So let me talk now, there's not much time left, let me talk now about ways of finding the self. Ways of finding the self. How do we... I've talked about some of the philosophy behind why the search for the self is important, and how it was in the Upanishads, some of the ways, there are other ways also, but some of the ways that the seers came to the conclusion that the self is reality, that the self is where we should look for reality, the self is where we look for enlightenment. So ways of finding the self. One way of finding the self is to hold on to the sense of I am. The sense of I am is the door into the infinite. The sense of I am is sometimes said to be the reflection of the infinite within the mind. That which I really am, the infinite self, reflected in the mind, gives the sense of I am. And so if we hold on to the sense of I am, what does that mean? How do you do that? You do that by getting a sense, making the mind a little quiet, It doesn't have to be totally quiet, because then that would require something that's beyond most of us. But if the mind is a little bit quiet, a little bit calm, then just try to feel the sense of I am. Normally when we think I am, we think, oh, I am Swami Atmarupananda, I am this body, or associated with this body, I am these thoughts, I am from a certain country and all of that. No, just try to hold on to the pure sense of I am, not I am this or that. So as you try to do that, you'll find that the picture of your body arises in your mind, maybe your name arises, other things, personal history and things arise. But just let all of that arise as if they're flies buzzing about your head. Let them come and let them go, don't bother with them. But just go on holding on to the sense of I am. If you do that, that's a wonderful practice, Again, there's no one practice meant for everyone. There's no one path in spiritual life meant for everyone. But this is a wonderful practice for many. In fact, even Sri Ramanuja, the great Vishishtadvaita Acharya, he said that before Bhakti Yoga comes Jnana Yoga. Now in Advaita they say before Jnana Yoga comes Bhakti Yoga, but Ramanujacharya said that before Bhakti Yoga comes Jnana Yoga. Why? Because he said that if you're going to relate yourself to God, what are you going to relate to God? Are you going to relate a piece of meat? That, oh God, I'm your devotee. I, this piece of meat, am your devotee. Oh no. God, this confused mind is your devotee. Oh no. Eventually what you want to relate to God is your very being. And if you haven't come to your very being, the essence of your being, the Jivatma, the essence of your being, which is consciousness, that's what you relate to God. And that's what you offer to God. Now, Advaita Vedanta goes on and says that that jiva that you're offering to God, that pure sense of I am, that sense of I am which you're offering to God, if you go on with that and go deeper into it, you find that that's melting into the infinite, that there's no separation between you and anything. You find that you are one with everything, one with the non-dual whole. But still, Ramanuja said that that was a preliminary to Bhakti Yoga, was to find the Jivatma. And so by holding on to the sense of I am, what happens? You begin to get a sense that you're not the body, you get a sense that you're not the mind and thoughts. What good does that do? What good does it do? Say you want to lead an ordinary life, you want to be well-adjusted, you want to be happy. It does a tremendous amount of good, even in your ordinary life. Even no matter what it is, what you pursue in life, you don't have to be a yogi, you don't have to be a swami, you don't have to be anything special. It's a tremendous help in life, because once you get that sense of the I am, that which I am is just the pure sense of I am. I just am. Everything else comes after that. Then you get a sense that when the mind is happy, okay, the mind is happy, but I am. When the mind is unhappy, okay, the mind is unhappy, but I am. I'm not tied into that. I've put a wedge between myself and the moods of the mind, so I'm not a slave of the moods of the mind. That gives something which is higher than ordinary happiness. You get a sense of freedom. You get a sense of the bliss of freedom, that I'm free from the mind. I'm not a slave of the mind. Let the mind be depressed. It doesn't matter. I am. The mind is happy. Okay, let it be happy. But I am. I'm higher even than the happy state of the mind. I'm higher than the unhappy state of the mind. Another strange thing happens as you hold on to the sense of I am. You begin to find that that is before everything. That the first thing that I know is I am, as I said at the beginning of the talk. I am, and then I have thoughts, then I have perceptions, everything else. There's first the sense of I am. I heard a Swami, a senior Swami, once say that the difference between an illumined soul and an ordinary person is that the illumined soul wakes up with the idea, I am Brahman. Maybe not in the words, but the perception, I am Brahman. Whereas an ordinary person, we wake up, you find the first thing you do when you wake up, if you observe, is you start figuring out who you are. You've been asleep, you've had a different sense of sleep identity, the dream identity. And when you wake up, you start thinking, okay, yes, I'm here in Chennai now, I'm not in Bellarmut where I live, I've come to Chennai, okay, I'm in this room. Swami Atmarupananda, yes, I've got to give a lecture today, or I've got to get up, it's time to go to the shrine, I've got to do this. All of these self-definitions come. And so if you learn to hold on to the sense of I am, you find that that is what is first. That comes first before everything. And as you go on with that, then you begin to find another stranger thing about the I am. Then you begin to see that everything that I perceive, everything that I experience, even the distant sun, even the distant stars, that those are inside of the I am. We think that I'm inside the body. I dwell inside the body. The mind is inside the body, and I, who I am, I'm inside the mind. But no, you begin to find that no, the body itself is inside the mind, and the mind and everything in the universe is inside of the sense of I am. When you look at you look at the sun, you see the sun rising in the I am. You look at the distant stars, you find that the stars are existing in the sense of I am. You begin to see that the sense of inner and outer begins to dissolve, and you begin to see that there's just the sense of I am, and everything that you perceive is floating in the I am. So that's a wonderful thing. Then you begin to feel connected to everything. You begin to feel connected to the whole universe around you. That's not yet the state of enlightenment, but that's an important stage in spiritual life, when we begin to feel that. All we need to get there is to hold on long enough to that sense of I am. Another way of getting there is the question, who am I? That was famously taught in the modern age by Ramana Maharshi, a great, great sage of your own Tamil Nadu, a great illumined soul who taught to hold on to the question, who am I? Not like a mantra, who am I, who am I, who am I, who am I, who am I? No, not like that. Don't count it on a japa mala. But just the questioning frame of mind, trying to peer back. It's like turning consciousness back on itself and trying to find the source of who I am. Okay, let the body go, let the mind go, let all of these thoughts go, but who am I? There's the same practice in Chinese Buddhism, in Chinese Chan Buddhism, the Chan school of Buddhism, which gave place to Zen in Japan. Zen Buddhism, what's called Zen Buddhism in Japan, is called Chan Buddhism in China, and it was the origin of Zen. There's a practice called the Hua To in Chinese language, and in that you're asked the question, or you ask yourself the question, what was my original face before I was born? So you ask, before I was born, who am I? That is, before this body and mind came into being, who am I? That's the meaning of the question. And so it's the same process of who am I, but trying to go beyond the body and mind. So another classic way of coming to self-knowledge is the Sakshi Bhava, the witnessing attitude of knowing that I am consciousness, and so I'm the witness of everything that happens. I'm not that which happens. I'm the witness, the Sakshi of everything. The whole universe is a panorama before me. Swami Vivekananda said that the book of life is turning page after page in front of you, but you are uninvolved. What happens when you practice Sakshi Bhava, when you try to be the Sakshi? If you do it long enough, if you're dedicated enough to it, and again, I'm not speaking about something which is beyond the reach of anybody, man or woman. It's something which is quite doable. You don't have to be a sannyasi to do it. You don't have to go off into a forest to do it. But if you do it long enough, it takes dedication. If you do it long enough, you begin to get the sense that I don't go anywhere. I don't go anywhere. I say, okay, I'm going to walk from here over to there. I see that the body is moving in relationship to other things, but I go nowhere because I'm not the body. I'm the witnessing consciousness. It's like seeing on a movie screen. You're watching a movie, and you're in a movie. Say the movie is taken from inside of a roller coaster, where the roller coaster is doing all sorts of fancy twists and turns. And when you watch it, you feel like you're in the roller coaster, going like this. Actually, you're sitting there in a stable seat like this. You're not going anywhere, but you actually have the feeling of motion. And in the movie, you get off the roller coaster, then you go to the airport and get in a plane in the movie. The movie is going from Chennai to Frankfurt. You're flying from Chennai to Frankfurt. You get out. On the movie, you see that, okay, we're going to Frankfurt now. And you get out in Frankfurt, you see all of the scenes. But where have you gone? You're still seated in your movie seat. You're seated in the same place. Well, you may say that, well, that doesn't sound like any fun. I actually want to go to Frankfurt. I don't want to just be seated in the same place and see scenes moving in front of me. No, that's because we don't understand the reality of the state. If you realize that, no, I move nowhere, everything moves before me, then you get a feeling of solidity, a feeling of permanence, a feeling of unchangeability, a feeling of inviolability, a feeling that whether life comes or death comes, whether birth comes or death comes, I'm still here. I'm still the same. Let life come, let birth come, let death come. It's all the same. I'm still the witnessing consciousness. Everything is passing before me. So now it's time to conclude. So let me find which of the thoughts that are left is most important to conclude with. Okay, I'll conclude with this. You all know, being in engineering and science fields, you all know about Copernicus. That's in early studies of science in secondary school, perhaps. Copernicus was the one who said that the sun is not at the center of the universe, or that the earth is not at the center of the universe. The sun, it may not even be at the center of the universe, but the sun is the center of our solar system, and so the planets move around the sun. Before that, we had in the West, we had the Ptolemaic system of astronomy, where the earth was the center of the universe. Now, if you take the earth as stable, and the heavens as moving around the earth, and that's a common sense view that any villager has, that the earth doesn't move, everything moves around the earth. The sun moves around the earth doesn't move around the sun, and the earth doesn't rotate. We're stable, everything else is moving. So if you have that common sense view, and then you try, as ancient people wanted to do, you try to calculate the movements of the heavens. You try to calculate for where is Mars going to be next year at this time? Where is Saturn going to be next year at this time? They could do it, but the calculations were extraordinarily complex. If you take this as stable and everything else is moving around us, then the movements of the heavens are extremely complex and very difficult to calculate, especially the movements of the planets. But Copernicus said, no, if you take the sun as the center and the planets as moving around, including the Earth moving around the sun and the Earth itself rotating, then suddenly the movements of the planets becomes very simple. It's a very simple mathematical calculation to figure out where things will be once you know that. And so, once you have this idea of the self, who am I? Once you realize that that is the most critical question in life, to know who I am, even if I'm a devotee of God and I want to seek God, even then knowing who I am is important, how up to a point, how to relate myself to God. If you understand that the self is critical and that the self is the center of my experience, if I have that simple understanding and begin to think about it and hold on to it, the idea that the self is at the center of all of my experience, it's like the Copernican revolution. Suddenly life becomes much more comprehensible. Suddenly life becomes much more understandable. Suddenly so many things about life take on a new light and a new simplicity. So just as the Copernican revolution caused a revolution of simplicity in the calculation of heavenly movements, so the knowledge that the self is the center of experience and that everything that I experience takes place within the self, that causes a similar revolution of simplicity in our life, and it makes life so much easier to understand. So, with that, let me conclude, and we'll give time for question and answers. But I'll give a closing chant for this the talk, and then I'll invite question and answers. Om madhu vatartayate madhuksharanti sindhavaha madhvirna santoshadhihi madhunaktamotoshasi madhumatparthivagum rajaha madhudyaurastu nah pita madhumandho vanaspatir madhumagum astu suryaha madhvirgavo bhavandunaha. Om madhu, om madhu, om madhu.